All right, welcome everyone. My name is Molly June Roque. I'm the Director of Archives and Special Collections at the GLBT Historical Society. I'm thrilled you've chosen to join us this evening for Alive in the Archives. We're going to hear presentations from two fantastic scholars, Martín González Romero from El Colegio de la Frontera Norte and Alex Melody Burnett from the University of Michigan. Sort of a preview of what's coming tonight. I'll give just a quick introduction to the GLBT Historical Society and to our archives, and then also to the Allan Bérubé and to the Allan Bérubé Stipend. That's sort of what brings us together here today. Martín and Alex are both recipients of the stipend, which will be entering a third round. We'll be giving out a stipend in early 2026. And applications for that stipend open on the 15th, which is, I believe, Monday of next week. And I'll share a little more information about that in a minute. Then we'll hear from Martín and then from Alex. They'll each give a presentation. We'll save questions till the end, but feel free to put those in the chat anytime during our session today. If you could, please keep yourself muted, but again, feel free to share thoughts, questions in the chat. I wanted to share a little bit about the GLBT Historical Society. We were founded in 1985. We are 40 years old this year. And our mission is to collect, preserve, and share the history of LGBTQ people and culture with a focus on Northern California and the San Francisco Bay Area. We do that through two sort of major programs, one being a museum located in the beautiful and gay Castro neighborhood of San Francisco, and the other being the archive space that I work in downtown San Francisco. The museum is open Tuesday through Sunday. The archives are available to researchers by appointment. And I want to emphasize both on this slide and when we talk about the stipend that we take researcher in a very broad way to mean not just academic scholars, but anyone interested in queer history that wants to learn more and do research and dig into the collections, the 1,100 collections that represent about 100 years of LGBT history that we hold in our archives. You can access our finding aids and see what's in our collection through our website, as well as see digitized collections. But I want to, sort of emphasize that's a very small sort of share of what we hold in our collection. You can find out about other events, membership in the Historical Society, tickets to the museum, and so on at our website, glbthistory.org. I also wanted to share a little bit about Allan Bérubé and the research stipend that is named after him. As I mentioned, I will be opening applications up on September 15th for this stipend, which provides $3,000 in funding to support access to our reading room and to our collections. So there's information on applying on our website. I will go ahead and copy that link and put it in the chat. And here we go. So check that out. You can read a little more information about the stipend. Allan Bérubé is a queer historian, a founding member of the GLBT Historical Society. And the stipend is named in his honor and supported through his estate. His best known work is the book Coming Out Under Fire. You can see the sort of flashy paperback edition there. I have the classic hardcover blurred in my Zoom camera edition. He also has a collection of his writings edited by John D'Amelio and Estelle Friedman called My Desire for History. I want to read you just very, very briefly from the preface of Coming Out Under Fire. This is an interesting story of historical research, archival research, and a collection that was an early contribution to our collection. The archival materials that Allan Bérubé brought together now exists as a collection at the GLBT Historical Society. If I hold the book right in front of my face, it will be in focus. Let me try that. Did it work? Love that. I'm going to use that trick. Allan says, one day in the fall of 1979, I was sitting on my living room floor in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco, sorting hundreds of World War II letters into piles by author, date, and place. A neighbor's friend had salvaged these papers and photographs from a dumpster when he had noticed that they included letters written by gay GIs. Having stashed them in his closet for 5 years, he gave them to me when my neighbor told him how interested I was in gay history. I will not tell you how many archival collection stories involve a dumpster at some point in the process. Reading those letters 10 years ago changed my life. This book was published in 1990. It made me want to know more about both lesbian and gay GIs in World War II. So I set out to uncover and make public their hidden histories. Sponsored by the San Francisco Lesbian and Gay History Project, I put together a slide presentation, Marching to a Different Drummer, that was based on my preliminary research. Using it to spread the word about what I was learning, raise funds from my research, and find veterans to interview, I presented the slideshow more than 100 times throughout the United States and Canada. Sponsored by local community groups, churches, veterans organizations, universities, and informal networks of friends. Working part-time to pay the bills, I spent several years interviewing veterans, combing through newspapers and magazines in libraries, reading war novels, requesting military documents through the Freedom of Information Act, and searching through archives. At the same time, under the auspices of the Cap Street Foundation, I and other members of the History Project established the World War II Project to maintain the oral histories, photographs, letters, military records, and memorabilia that I was accumulating. And that World War II project is now a collection here at the GLBT Historical Society. I like that little glimpse into the research process, both where Allan's inspiration came from and also the amount of work and research and scrappiness that often goes into historical research. So at this point, that is enough hearing from me. I know you're here to hear our wonderful presenters. So first, I'm going to hand it over to, oops, let me go back one. Martín González Romero, Associate Professor at the Department of Cultural Studies at El Colegio de la Frontera Norte in Tijuana. I will stop sharing, and Martín, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Molly, for your introduction, and thank you all for this effort for organizing these presentations. And thank you everyone who joined in today to this Zoom meeting. I'm really excited to share with all of you. And I would like to start with a big thank you to the GLBT Historical Society. As I was working on my presentation for today, I realized that actually the archival findings that I have made in your institution have pretty much shaped my personal and professional life this past few years. These findings that I've made thanks to your work preserving and making your collection accessible to the public have not only led me to a very fascinating chapter of queer history in the Mexican-American border, a chapter that is pretty much ongoing to this day, but it has also indirectly helped me to articulate a very productive research agenda for myself that has helped me get the job I have today. It made me move to Tijuana, where I live now, which is a very interesting place, a deeply scarred city, I should say, that has helped me better understand the world we live in today. So for that, I am very grateful. Anyway, I don't want to digress. I'm going to share a screen with you because I want to share some pictures that might be interesting. There you go. So let me tell you a bit about my historical research project, which is pretty much ongoing and has an important archival component, but it also includes the production of oral histories and other methods. Roughly, my project intends to reconstruct the history of the Royal Imperial Casa de Tijuana, or House of Tijuana, the only Mexican chapter or house or court of the imperial court system, and international LGBT plus social service organization with presence in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. This broad research goal has actually proven to me to be very productive to unpack a lot of the complexities of the history of queer life in the northern Mexican border. Binational subculture where identity categories collide and are mutually embedded in a network of social resistance, activism, and artistic expression. This to me has involved an approach to the imperial court system's relationship with Mexico, as well as a recognition to the ways in which the institution has shaped local LGBT plus history and helped ease some of the hardships of queer life in the global South, or at least in Tijuana as a door to that reality, right? As you probably know, the imperial court system's history dates back to San Francisco's pre-Stonewall queer subculture, founded in 1965 by Jose Sarria, an emblematic figure in American queer history. The court system has grown to become a huge fundraising network. I don't know if you can see the rest of the presentation.
I think we're seeing your PowerPoint window, and I don't know if maybe you need to share a different window, but we're still seeing your intro slide, Martin.
That's weird.
Oh, we see
There
the
you go.
cluster window.
Well,
Yeah.
we can see that one, yes. So to this day, the Imperial Court, as you know, helps raise a significant amount of money for human rights, LGBT plus, and sexual health organizations, as well as uh, fundraising their own scholarship program, among other different efforts. And although the network and the subculture around it has grown to become very influential, it has preserved its traditions with a striking rigor, I should say. As you, most of you probably know, every year local courts elect an emperor, which is usually a gay man, and empresses, usually a drag queen, to lead the fundraising efforts of the community. However, throughout the years, of course, different sexual and gender identities have served as emperors and empresses. I started working on this project after discovering the history of the Imperial Casa de Tijuana, thanks to this poster right here in the Jose Sarria papers at the GLBT Historical Society archives, as you know. This collection was donated by Jose Sarria after his death in 2013. And although the amount of documentation regarding the Mexican chapter is rather small compared to the 130 boxes of documentation kept in the collection, it helps uncover a pretty much unknown history. In the United States and Canada, most members of the court system know of their eventual expansion to Mexico, but few are aware of when and how Tijuana's LGBT plus community history community founded its own court. In Mexico, a handful of activists and local Tijuana queer history enthusiasts are aware of the activities of the court system in Mexican territory. And I'd like to point out that although there are a few but key documents about the Tijuana court in Jose Sarria's collection during my visit to the archives in 2023, thanks to the Allan Bérubé Research Stipend, I went through as much of the papers as possible, not only to help me reconstruct the history of the organization as a whole, which is a very ambitious task given its dimensions. It's a huge organization with chapters in every state of the United States and a handful more in Canada. And specifically to reconstruct the history of the neighboring court of San Diego, but also to get a sense of the protocols, of the humor, the parody, as well as the seriousness of how these organizations has functioned through the years, right? So today, the Royal Imperial Casa de Tijuana no longer exists as a functioning court within the system. I believe the reason for both things, like its history being unknown and its disappearance, can be explained partly by the profound economic disparities affecting the global South. because ironically, the colonial and imperial history that the court system itself mocks in this exercise that reclaims power, glamour, and sophistication for queer communities has indeed shaped reality, thinking more about world history in ways that are hard to deal with for a social service organization that revolves around the discourse of camp parody as well as that of charity, which I must say has some inevitable paternalistic component to it, right? So when I first started working on this project, I was struck by what I first found in the archives. The Royal Imperial Casa de Tijuana was founded in the early 80s and struggled to stay active and keep up with how things worked within the system in the United States. At the same time, visiting monarchs during the Imperial Court of San Diego's weekend coronation celebrated a traditional annual trip to Tijuana, where they organized a quote unquote camp coronation and raised funds for the local community. However, this event was full of colorful caricatures of Mexico and Mexican culture, ranging from simple cliches to much more problematic references to local violence, crime, and corruption. Here, for example, you can see Canadian Empress Judy Jive running for Empress of Rio Tijuana, also wanted for burrito busting and enchilada excavation, whatever that means. It's kind of funny, but at the same time, as I will try to explain, tends to be a bit problematic when you uncover the rest of the court's history. However, at least my interest in problematic Mexican and Latinx representation has somewhat shifted as I have inevitably gotten involved with the court system itself, attending their fundraising events. In 2023, during my visit to the archives using the research stipend, I consulted the archives and I photographed 100 of documents, but I also attended a fundraising event commemorating the 10-year anniversary of Jose Sarria's passing. There I met Jean Brake, who has been emperor and was the founder of the Alamo Empire of San Antonio, Texas, and who has long been involved in the courts and has recently created the Jose Sarria Foundation, specifically dedicated to the memory of his late friend. And when I told him about my interest in these sort of like caricatures of Mexican culture, he was mostly baffled, I should say. He had actually participated in some of those Tijuana trips, and his recollection of those trips is that they were an expression of international solidarity, right? And very reasonably so, I must say, they actually were that. During my visit to the archives, I was also able to document that the Imperial Court of San Diego helped raise important resources during the 80s and 90s for Tijuana's first LGBT plus organizations fighting the dire situation of HIV/AIDS pandemic that affected the region strongly. Sources suggest that those resources possibly helped finance LGBT plus community building in the region very strongly. And to be fair, however, American members to this of the court system to this day consider that the Mexican inclusion of the within the international court system to be somewhat of a token that doesn't actually reflect the reality of the organization. As I was telling you, there is no longer an Imperial Court of Tijuana, and they still consider themselves an organization from the United States, Canada, and Mexico. So basically, I consider that both perspectives are not mutually exclusive and that they inform us of paradoxes faced by LGBT politics even today. The picture that you can see on this slide is not an archival finding per se, but I got it from attending the 2024 San Diego coronation. It is a call to raise funds specifically for an LGBT plus migrant shelter that is actually a couple of blocks from where I live now. And so I wanted to show it to you because you can really get a sense of how the archival ephemera that was preserved first by Jose Sarria himself and then by the Historical Society kind of like prolongs to these days. And well, moreover, I think that the history of the court system in the Tijuana-San Diego border seems to me as a sort of crossroads for understanding the power and the limits, not only of queer parity or camp parity, but of subcultural organizing and LGBT plus mobilization as a whole. This in the context of these liberationist movements transforming their radical language during the 80s and 90s in the midst of the expansion of the neoliberal agenda, right? So I believe that the imperial court's work, which is both activism and charity, as they indirectly financed LGBT plus political mobilization, plays an ambiguous role in accompanying these historical transformations of LGBT plus mobilization. On the one hand, it helped solve a real and specific problem for the local queer population, at least in Tijuana, and on the other, it reinforced power structures between North and South through the discourse of charity. And I believe that a look into the San Diego court's history can help explain this. It was founded in 1973, and in the beginning, I believe the Imperial Court of San Diego helped local LGBT organizations take shape. Its first benefit, for example, was in favor of the Metropolitan Community Church and the San Diego Lesbian and Gay Men's Community Center, as it was known at the time. And even though emperors, mainly popular bartenders, businessmen, and the occasional porn star that injected some financial resources to the organization were important for its functioning, soon the leadership of Nicole Ramirez Murray, then Murray Ramirez, who you can see in the pictures here, became very evident. In 1979, Empress Nicole became the first empress to be re-elected. And she would reign for other 5 different terms. She's now the leader of the imperial court system as Queen Mother of the Americas and Jose Sarria's successor. She's a controversial figure and a renowned activist, and is known for maybe taking her royal authority a bit too seriously. I'm deeply scared and I respect her so much. I haven't introduced myself, but I've seen her at events. She has declared, for example, that the courts are indeed a monarchy and not a democracy. She has made the return of absolute monarchy a campaign slogan, and she once single-handedly crowned herself as Napoleon, shocking the crowd during Coronation Ball. These are things that I have learned through the archive. Fear and respected as well. She seems to have been working tirelessly and actually led the Imperial Court of San Diego through the worst times of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. In 1994, when she finished her 6th reign, she also served as national co-chair for Stonewall 25. And the next year, in 1995, she found she would be front row in Tijuana's first Pride March next to local activists that had been mobilizing in Tijuana for over a decade. I don't know if you can see their resemblance in the faces, but on this picture here to your left, you can see Nicole Ramirez Murray. It is hard to determine exactly when the neighboring court started getting involved within the Tijuana LGBT plus community. But archival documents mention fundraising for Tijuana for the first time in 1979, coinciding with Empress Nicole's second reign. Roughly around the same years, the San Diego court started their traditional trip to Tijuana, where visiting monarchs were crowned honorary monarchs of Rio Tijuana in camp coronations, and were held responsible for fundraising for the local community. And, if titles were make-believe in general, the titles of Rio Tijuana were even more so, as they visiting monarchs were crowned and they were not actually part of the community, right? Soon, the HIV/AIDS epidemic struck the community, and fundraising acquired a sense of emergency. Body bags, actually, that were not provided by the government in Mexico, became a necessary article and a sort of symbol that appears over and over at the archives. A symbol of, I think, well, the dramatic situation faced by locals, right? This dramatic situation did not mean that the courts abandoned its humor and campiness. Although Ramirez Murray once said she had to adapt her drag persona and maybe to the seriousness of the situation. She even said she now had to impersonate more of an Imelda Marcos, which was a very popular leader at the time. And surprisingly, this didn't stop the camp coronation of Rio Tijuana from taking place, and it had some problematic undertones, as I have been saying. This 1985 flyer, for example, stated, and I want to quote it, it says, "Campaigning for this illustrious question mark position may officially begin by April 1. Bribery, extortion, murder, and cheating are permitted in Mexican elections." Even though some of this kind of like Mexican curious old Mexico south of the border rhetoric from these campaigns were indeed perpetuated, actually even by local tourist hotspots, some of them felt as a very direct take on Mexican backwardness. And these kind of affirmations about make-believe monarchs and territories, even though they're common within the court system, they seem hurtfully real considering the local struggles to keep up and form their own court and coordinate autonomous fundraising efforts and making like their own imperial court. This Royal Imperial House of Tijuana, on the other hand, was founded in 1983 with a treaty with the Court of San Diego. Local efforts from the court adapted the system's traditional camp party to national and regional identity symbols. Throughout the years, monarchs added their own style to the court. For example, the first coronation crowned Napoleon VII with titles dating back to the Aztec empires, right? And from what I can gather from archival documents, the Mexican chapter had strong ties with the Frente Internacional por las Garantías Humanas de Tijuana, which is the first local gay and lesbian liberation group in Tijuana, which interestingly enough has a Spanish name that forms an English acronym, which is FIGHT. When the House of Tijuana planned to invite Jose Sarria to their coronation, as you can see in this poster right here, and strengthen their position within the system, they faced a boycott from Nicole Ramirez Murray herself, or at least that's what I can gather from the archives. The neighboring courts faced a diplomatic conflict, and Jose Sarria had to intercede in favor of the Tijuana court. Relations were eventually restored, but the Mexican court struggled to promote participation with the hardships faced by the local community. And I don't have much time to explain the dynamics of local activism. I'm about to finish my presentation. But it seems that the imperial court's ties in Tijuana changed by the early 1990s, benefiting local Grupo Ike, which you can see in the slide, a group that split from Fight, which was the first local organization. And I believe that the presence of Max Mejia, an experienced Trotskyist militant who founded the first gay liberation groups in Mexico City and moved to Tijuana in the 90s to work with Fight, actually veered the organization's focus from charity to politics and structural transformation. So the Imperial Court's presence in Tijuana most probably contributed to the tensions already present in local activism with different discourses and different vocabulary as the imperial courts became a possible source of income as well as a model for financing gay and lesbian movement at the time. So my time is up. I just want to conclude by saying that I would say that the work of the Imperial Court of San Diego in Tijuana was undoubtedly a demonstration of LGBT plus solidarity. Their efforts helped address immediate problems of the population and likely contributed to their mobilization. However, the relations across the border were hardly ones of equal conditions. And that is one of the things that I am trying to reconstruct through my research as I contact key informants who have actually been involved with this history within Tijuana's queer community. Thank you. There you go. You can have, there's my email if you want to contact me or something like that. Thank you very much, Molly. I look forward to the next presentation.
Thank you, Martin. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen for just one moment to introduce Alex. That was wonderful. Thank you. And just want to remind folks, feel free to put questions, thoughts in the chat. And we'll hopefully have a little time for that at the end of Alex's presentation. But next, I want to introduce Alex Melody Burnett, PhD candidate in History and Women's and Gender Studies at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Thank you so much, Alex, and I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to begin to share my screen real quick. Can you all see my screen? Okay, great. Cool. You all can hear me okay? Fantastic. Great. So before beginning, I would like to thank Molly for coordinating tonight's event. I'd also like to briefly thank Isaac Fellman and Devin McGee and Munchmore for pointing me in the direction of many of these materials. I'd also like to note that I use pseudonyms to describe all of the incarcerated people in this lecture, and that what I'm sharing today is a work in progress. So I'm interested and excited and eager to, hear your all responses to this and have a conversation. So, Victoria Fernandez wanted to see her husband. Raised as a boy in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Fernandez moved to San Francisco in the 1950s, where she adopted a woman's name, began hormonal replacement therapy, and built a successful career as an erotic dancer and professional female impersonator under the stage name of Vicky Starr. She also married a man named Jonathan Jones, though it seems that they did not complete the official paperwork to gain legal recognition of their union. Around 1970, Jones was convicted of murder and sentenced to the California Medical Facility, a men's prison in East Bay community of Vacaville that operated an infamous state-funded conversion therapy program under the eugenic guise of treating, quote, prisoners who have contagious diseases and abnormal sexual tendencies, end quote. Although Fernandez regularly visited Jones during the first 9 months of his incarceration, prison officials abruptly suspended her visitation rights in 1971 after discovering that she was, as one prison doctor put it, quote, a transsexual. Quote, we do not believe that continued contact with this individual is conducive towards the rehabilitation and eventual release of Mr. Jones into the community, Vacaville's medical superintendent explained, citing concerns over Fernandez's, quote, homosexual entanglement with her husband. Outraged, Fernandez spent the next 3 years fighting the California Department of Corrections for the right to visit Jones, assembling a broad coalition of physicians, lawyers, elected officials, and social workers who wielded their professional authority to advocate on her behalf. In their letters to the Vacaville administration, Fernandez's advocates generally emphasized her, quote, normal feminine appearance in compliance with the restrictive terms of her probation. But John L. Burton, a Democratic Assembly member in the California legislature, framed this conflict differently, expressing concern in a February 1974 letter that the Vacaville administration had, quote, violated Fernandez's, quote, civil rights due to her, quote, sexual status. For her part, Fernandez privately interpreted her case through a Christian moral framework. As she explained in a November 1971 letter to Jones, quote, there is a program administrator called Mr. Marquez who refuses to let me in. He is a godless man. Who forgets that there is a greater judge of us all? I really feel pity for him, end quote. Despite Fernandez's private feelings, she publicly presented herself as a respectable and productive worker. Almost immediately after losing her visitation rights, Fernandez contacted the National Transsexual Counseling Unit, a San Francisco social service agency that sent her a referral to meet with an employment counselor from California's Department of Rehabilitation. Established in 1963 under the Democratic gubernatorial administration of Pat Brown, the department's mission was to help disabled Californians avoid permanent, quote, dependence upon welfare. Quote, the disabled can be made an economic asset through compulsory vocational training, the department declared in a 1968 report to Republican Governor Ronald Reagan, in which the authors described, quote, dependency on public assistance as a, quote, constant drain on the resources of the state and the nation, end quote. While the department's moralizing emphasis on employment reinforced the sense that California was facing a crisis of, quote, welfare dependency, exacerbated by the purportedly immoral economic and reproductive decisions of low-income Latina and Black women, Fernandez strategically used the department's resources for her own ends. To presenting herself as a disabled worker who qualified for state employment counseling, Fernandez hoped to gain a job outside of San Francisco's female impersonation industry, which could help her appeal more respectable in the eyes of skeptical prison administrators. As the years dragged on, Fernandez eventually adopted a more confrontational strategy. After San Francisco's Neighborhood Legal Assistance Foundation threatened to file a lawsuit on her behalf, Fernandez won a partial victory in April 1974. While Fernandez regained the right to visit her husband, the Vacaville administration demanded that she wear, quote, male attire while visiting Jones and refrain from using the women's restroom, citing a doctor's description of her as, quote, biologically male to justify this discriminatory policy. Over the next year, Fernandez appealed this decision, arguing the prison's bathroom policy violated her civil rights and left her vulnerable to sexual harassment. In a May 1974 letter threatening another lawsuit, Fernandez's attorney, David Moon, argued that the prison's bathroom policy, quote, in effect constitutes a denial of her right to visit, emphasizing, quote, serious psychological damage that Fernandez would experience in a men's restroom. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Moon's emphasis on Fernandez's psychological well-being failed to move prison leadership, who framed their bathroom policy as a moderate compromise with hysterical San Francisco liberals who failed to comprehend the bureaucratic challenges of operating a complex prison system. In January 1975, attorney Francis Chang informed Fernandez that San Francisco's Neighborhood Legal Assistance Foundation would be dropping her case, claiming that her diagnosis, quote, preoperative transsexuality, end quote, had, quote, no legal standing under the law. From there, the archive runs cold, leaving little indication about whether Fernandez continued her legal battle or begrudgingly complied with the prison's visitation rules. We know that Fernandez continued to visit Jones well into 1974, even though guards routinely harassed her for holding her husband's hand, lightly touching his arm. What is clear, however, is that Fernandez and Jones deeply cared for one another in ways that no archive can ever fully capture. Fernandez's case left behind an unusually large paper trail, but the carceral state's attempts at controlling her intimate relationships and labor were not exceptional. Following Jules Gill Peterson's call for a materialist history of sexuality under racial capitalism, my talk explores how a predominantly Black and Latina group of working-class trans women navigated California's penal system during the early years of the war on crime. Often reduced to minor figures within trans and queer historiography, these incarcerated Californians left behind a much larger and richer archival record than historians have previously acknowledged. Drawing on materials from the GLBT Historical Society, my talk today makes two broad claims. First, I argue that the history of incarcerated trans women can be helpfully understood through the lens of feminist labor history. As I learned from the GLBT Historical Society's archives, many of these Californians spoke extensively about the paid and unpaid labor they performed while incarcerated. Yet, as Daniela Valdez astutely observes, scholars have rarely analyzed trans subjects as workers at all. Second, I suggest that Fernandez was not alone in facing state scrutiny for her marriage. As they demonstrate, California penal administrators aggressively policed incarcerated trans women's sexual and romantic lives, focusing much of their efforts on punishing interracial relationships that develop behind bars. But to understand this history of social control, it is essential to understand California's history of penal segregation. Although a very small number of trans women, such as the ACLU client Anna Moisten, successfully convinced state authorities to place them within women's prisons and jails, the vast majority of incarcerated trans women in California were detained within so-called Queens tanks, which were segregated wings of men's prisons and jails. According to the historian Elias Walker Vituli, California prison administrators began segregating trans women and prisoners in Queens tanks during the 1940s, creating this new form of carceral infrastructure under the guise of modernizing California's prison system, in line with Governor Earl Warren's New Deal-inspired prison reform agenda. In his 1950 memoir, The Clinton Truman Duffy, who was the warden of San Quentin, outlined a theory of penal segregation that reflected this New Deal prison reform project. Although Duffy claimed that all homosexuals suffered from, quote, some sort of personality disorder, end quote, he devoted much of his ire towards the growing presence of self-described queens within his institution. Duffy argued that these, quote, women behaved in an intentionally promiscuous and provocative manner, which incited sex-deprived male prisoners to lose control of their sexual impulses, rape queens, and waver on their pathway toward rehabilitation. As he explained in a passage on the, quote, problem of prison homosexuality, queens, quote, fermented more violence, engaged in more feuds, and perhaps cost more lives than all other prisoners combined, end quote. Through separating queens from the general male population, Duffy hoped that he would prevent the dangerous spread of sexual degeneracy within San Quentin and give queens, quote, a fresh chance at embracing heterosexual masculinity through compulsory psychological counseling. While state authorities portrayed Queens tanks as benevolent tools of liberal social uplift, Queens tank prisoners understood their segregation differently. In oral history interviews and published articles, imprisoned Californians argued that penal administrators used the Queens tank system to create a gendered and racialized division of prisoner labor during the 3 decades after World War II. In a December 1976 interview with Join Hands, which was a really important sort of gay prisoner publication based in the San Francisco Bay Area, Joanne, who is a Black prisoner who, quote, wore female clothing on the street, made this precise point, claiming that Queens tank prisoners were largely prohibited from working, quote, the various jobs in her San Francisco men's jail. This discriminatory policy not only contributed to an atmosphere of, quote, congestion on the Queens tier, but also undermined her ability to purchase commissary goods or save money for bail. Things were not much better for the few Queens tank prisoners approved for paid employment. According to a December 1977 interview with Alana, a 19-year-old Hawaiian trans woman imprisoned in a San Francisco men's jail, penal administrators frequently assigned her and other Queens tank prisoners to work in the jail's kitchen or laundry. Like other Hawaiian domestic workers throughout the Pacific world, Alana routinely faced racist sexual harassment on her job, recalling that white male guards, quote, didn't care if she experienced sexual violence during work shifts and would deliberately send her to clean secluded parts of the jail, such as the back stairway, where sexual assaults frequently occurred with the administration's tacit approval. Rather than a rehabilitative custodial practice, the Queens tank system created a captive workforce whose domestic labor was devalued, yet essential for the smooth operation of California's rapidly expanding penal system. And yet, Queens tanks were more than just sites of reproductive labor exploitation and, quote, state sexual assault, to borrow Angela Davis's useful concept. As the Queens tank archive makes clear, These segregated institutions unintentionally facilitated moments of camaraderie and collectivity against this backdrop of pretty extreme violence. During an April 1978 visit to Alana's jail, the journalist Randy Schultz, for instance, observed that many Queens Tank prisoners had, quote, prior relationships that were established for years in their Tenderloin drag haunts, end quote, contributing to a warm and friendly atmosphere in which, quote, the girls would, quote, giggle together about their shared memories in the Tenderloin, share advice regarding fashion and hormone replacement therapy, and dance together to music from Soul Train, a nationally syndicated television show that prominently featured Black musicians. Beyond documenting a collective feeling of fondness among, quote, the girls, Schultz expressed a degree of paternalistic surprise that his informants built, quote, remarkably stable romantic relationships with the few, quote, male-identified prisoners in the Queen's Tank, pairing off in the evenings to discuss their days and have sex. Some of, quote, the girls even cleaned their husbands' cells. According to the historian Regina Kunzel, these so-called prison marriages were relatively common during the 1960s and 70s, even though California's lewd conduct law made it a crime for prisoners to enter sexual relationships with each other. Quote, although they are caricatures of normal sex life and romance, homosexual affairs in jails or prisons are no joke and should not be treated as such, California's State Correction Officers Training Guide explained, which I've included a photo of that right there. In a November 1976 article for Join Hands, a Queens Tank prisoner from Soledad State Prison described the impact of such policing, noting that guards selectively enforced California's lewd conduct law that specifically punished the sexual activity of, quote, drag queens busted for prostitution, end quote. However, closer reading of the GLBT Historical Society's archive reveals that California prison guards were especially concerned about preventing interracial prison marriages within Queens Tanks. In a December 1976 Join Hands interview with a multiracial group of Queens Tank prisoners, the interviewees agreed that their, quote, liberal San Francisco jail was less racially segregated than San Quentin and Soledad, where, quote, interracial marriages, sexual liaisons, and friendships were strictly, quote, forbidden according to the prison's unofficial rules. Although Warden Duffy ordered the elimination of racial segregation inside San Quentin in 1945, white prisoners, guards, and penal administrators engaged in a cross-class, decades-long campaign of massive resistance against this desegregation mandate, producing a post-war system, quote, carceral apartheid, according to the historian Brittany Friedman. Keenly familiar with San Quentin's racially segregated culture, Joanne told Join Hands that she occasionally had, quote, both white and brown men hit on me during her time in San Quentin, but her non-Black suitors, quote, had to keep very, very sneaky, end quote, to publicly appear in alignment with the prison segregationist rules. In a 1974 ethnographic study of Chicano prisoners in San Quentin, the anthropologist Theodore R. Davison echoed this depiction of interracial prison marriages, finding that these unions were heavily policed and stigmatized, though he noted that Chicano white, Chicano Black marriages face slightly less social ostracism compared to couples involving Black men and white trans women. In an October 1976 letter to Join Hands, Jonathan, a 36-year-old Black gay man married to a white queen named Sally, noted that correctional staff frequently punished couples who violated his prison's prohibition on interracial relationships, recounting how guards placed his wife in solitary confinement because of their marriage. Like their counterparts outside prison, interracial prison marriages remained intensely stigmatized and vulnerable to state scrutiny, even after California's Supreme Court overturned the state's anti-miscegenation law in the Perez v. Sharp ruling, was nearly 2 decades before the 1967 Loving v. Virginia Supreme Court ruling. To end my talk, I want to briefly reflect upon the connections between the history of Queens Tank prisoner labor and the history of marriage that I've sort of outlined here in this talk. As Peggy Pascoe, Tara Hunter, and other historians of marriage have long argued, marriage is in many ways an economic institution, deeply embedded with ideologies of racial purity, citizenship, and the intergenerational transmission of private property through heterosexual patriarchs who benefit from their wives' and children's unpaid domestic labor. However, for Victoria Fernandez and the Queens Tank prisoners I've described today, Their marriages were not respected or recognized by the state, even when they strategically attempted to perform a kind of marital respectability in their dealings with hostile government authorities. As Fernandez's papers make clear, this calculated performance required a tremendous amount of emotional and administrative labor. It was her, after all, who met with attorneys, convinced paternalistic white male doctors to write letters on her behalf, and made the long commute from her small Tenderloin apartment to the East Bay to regularly visit her imprisoned husband. As scholars of transgender history increasingly turn our attention to questions of work and political economy, I hope that our field considers the significance of such visibilized and deeply feminized forms of labor, much of which occurred in and around prisons. Thank you.
Wrap up there. I want to extend a huge, huge thanks, and please join me in extending a huge, huge thanks to our two presenters, Martín González Romero and Alex Melody Burnett. Those were both fantastic presentations and just wonderful to hear about your research and scholarship. Oh, I like the heart that exploded. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, whether that's dinner or sleep, and hope to see you all soon. Take care.